What lies at the heart of a great Souls-like? Is it the challenging combat? Or is it the obscure lore? The slightly cracked characters? Is it the personal connection the game forms with the player? Or the themes of struggle and strife that these games so successfully evoke through their gameplay and storytelling? Is it an amalgamation of all of these elements, or is it an elusive X-factor that can't quite be pinned down? This is the question I will attempt to answer in this video by dissecting the game design of Souls-likes. You wake up half dead or resurrected in a forgotten corner of the world. You barely have anything on you and you make your way through a decrepit landscape. It looks horrifying, but there's beauty in its desolation. You feel small in a great big world that seems to be taken over by death and decay, and you instinctively prepare to defend yourself. Soon, you find tools to fight for the time being. Tools that look used and with a history. Tools that, if you are curious enough, will tell you more not just about themselves, but maybe even about the world and how it came to be this way. As you make your way through anything that gets in your path, you see yourself facing something straight out of a nightmare. If you felt small before, you feel minuscule now. You try to fight, but you are overwhelmed by the sheer scale and strength of the monstrosity you are facing. What chance do you have? You try and try and try, but to no avail. You die trying over and over again, and that is the end. This is the journey that most Souls-like send you on at the very beginning of the game. Not a power fantasy, but a trip down an unforgiving world that most players leave. According to Steam's achievements, most players didn't finish Dark Souls or Dark Souls 2, or guess what? Dark Souls 3. In fact, only 68.8% of the players defeated the Bell Gargoyles, which means the rest 31.2% of them never saw the view from that tower. Only 67% of the players defeated Wart of the Boreal Valley, which means the rest 33% of them never had the feeling of raising the banner and seeing the beautiful world of DS3. What I'm trying to get to is that these games have a way of successfully intimidating the players. The games masterfully craft the feeling of despair and having no chance of success. It gets difficult to think straight when you're faced with something that is 10 times your size inhabiting a desolate and horrid place. So the question is, wouldn't the designers of the game want more people to finish their product? I mean, yeah, but what is the cost of that? If the game is designed for players to mow through enemies with ease, then most Souls-likes have been utter failures. But these games are designed to be challenges. Tough challenges that can only be overcome through the player's own skill. Not primarily through stats or equipment, but knowledge of the game's mechanics and understanding of the world and the things that inhabit it. This requires time and patience, and a lot of it, which, to be fair, not a lot of people can spare. It also requires you to want to change, to put in effort to see yourself becoming better at something. Not to show off to the world, but just to prove to yourself that you can change, you can adapt, you can learn, and you can be better, even if it is at a video game that no one will ever know you finished. Seeing the designers stick so honestly close to their original vision of the game at the cost of losing players shows how much belief they had in what they made and the experience they crafted. What was described before was basically the tutorial area in most Souls-likes, and it is amazing to see how this just keeps repeating for most of the game without getting old. There's also a supplementary loop of finding secrets and optional bosses that can be attached here. We also have to attach leveling up that can be done essentially anytime but needs materials, so we put it here. Now here's the thing, this loop can also be used to describe an action game like any of the God of Wars. What separates Souls-likes from other action-adventure titles is the pacing of the combat, the stakes involved, and the carefully thought-out encounter design. The difference is the feeling of bewilderment when you enter a new area. It is the idea that if you let your guard down, Even one of the basic enemies can be deadly. It is the feeling of finding a buried treasure that feels forgotten by time itself. All of these things are tied by the central pillars of the game. Everything from in-game to the marketing of the game is made to make you feel weak and in way over your head. And the context in which these games are talked about does not help. You fight legends of these worlds while constantly being reminded of how insignificant you are. Every victory you achieve is through the skin of your teeth. Every area you enter feels hostile to you. Every piece of lore you find seems to have more questions attached to it than answers. This feeling of constantly being an underdog drives you. Every fight you win, every boss you vanquish makes you feel like you accomplished something. The fights themselves are not that difficult when you get a hold of the movesets of the enemies and the bosses, but getting a read on them requires you to have patience and the will to learn. To admit that you're not good enough this run, but soon enough you will be. The heart-pounding victories that make you leap out of your chair only have meaning when you face something you were afraid of and something you overcame. Another way the game intimidates you is by giving you something to lose. The in-game currency. By giving the players something to value, the game makes sure that every time you fight an enemy, you try your hardest to keep your hard-earned souls. This tension of losing your souls makes you play in ways that aren't optimal or make the game way more difficult and complicated than it actually is. If you have lost a good amount of souls, you know the sense of relief you get once they're actually gone and how much easier the game feels after. Before moving forward to the next pillar, I want to point out that I specifically put intimidation as a pillar and not difficulty. This is because the game's most visible aesthetic is its ability to make the player feel powerless against a dark world. Making a difficult game would not be enough to sustain that. The devs needed to create scenarios that made the players feel lost and always fighting an uphill battle while keeping a sliver of hope alive in them. I'm not going to go over too much as to what I mean by analog mechanics because that is a video on its own. For now, let's just say it encompasses affordances that are based on a spectrum. This includes mechanics like positioning in a fight or attacks being input driven rather than animation driven. The mechanics that are always in the player's hands, like dodging, attack timing, positioning, and knowledge, are most of the time more important than enemy levels and health bars. The language of the game is not stats, but what the game conveys through its level and combat design. Every combat encounter is carefully thought out. There aren't throwaway sequences that have the player mindlessly walk through an area while a horde of enemies assaults you or overwhelms you through sheer quantity. An example of carefully crafted encounters is the very first one on High Wall of Lothric from Dark Souls 3. To lay it out, there's an archer on a scaffolding who wakes up once you get down on the wall below. There are two dogs patrolling that wall. There is a hollow with a halberd coming soon from the stairs in front. There's a hollow with an axe coming up from the stairs to the left. There's a hollow sleeping next to the axe hollow's starting position. This carefully laid out position and combination of enemies makes the players think of strategies to get out unscathed. And this carefully crafted scenario design runs throughout the game. These enemies don't feel random. They don't feel overwhelming. They feel like a test of observational and mechanical skill. As time goes on, you start spotting ambushes and do the Mad Max "that's bait" gesture. The more you play these games, the more you start paying attention to what the designers have hidden away. This makes the games a dialogue between the designer and the player. The designers talk through mechanics and level design, and the player responds by either playing into them or seeing through them. But all of it is a relationship, a constant pull and push between the devs and the player. An ambush starts to feel like a cheeky joke. A secret starts to feel instinctive, like reading a friend's dick before they lie. Even the levels themselves speak volumes if you just stop and listen. I know that everyone likes to talk about the lift from Dark Souls as a really good level design example and how it made them fall in love with the game, but I want to focus on something more subtle. Let's take the high wall as an example again. When you get to the first bonfire, chances are you'll go down a path that leads to a closed door, which is a shortcut you unlock later. It is because the level design makes it so that is what the player's eyes will first see. And that is amazing level design guiding the player not by map markers but by lighting and environment design. Soon when you come to the actual path, you see this hollow crying that wakes up everybody else. This makes the player run and get them, making the path they take very easily beat that to an ambush with some assassins. But if they stop and look around after getting the Screaming Hollow, they will see another path, not hidden behind a wall, just slightly obscured by the lighting. And if they take this path, they are rewarded by not getting trapped by the ambush. But here's the thing. This reward only had meaning when the player had fallen to the ambush once before. It is the loss of souls in the ambush that gave meaning to finding the other path. Without it, the other path feels like a meaningless choice. The combat in these games has a flow to it. There's a rhythm to every boss fight, and the first step is always to figure it out. If it's a slow boss, you can attack first. If it's a fast one, you wait for it to whiff. You take turns dodging and weaving in attacks during the time the enemy is recovering. And if you attack when it's not your turn, you get punished for it. It almost feels like Slay the Spire or any turn-based combat game in that regard. This is very visible in Dark Souls, but it gets more blurry in later titles as the speed of the turns increases. You always think whether to attack, create space, heal, recover some stamina, or be greedy. Having a good understanding of your attack and recovery time is the key to winning these fights. The progression in Souls-likes is always player-centric. The game gives the players the reins on how they want to face the challenge ahead. There's little to no hand-holding, making some of the more obscure elements that much harder to piece together. But the game trusts the player. The tools it gives are more than enough for the player to overcome whatever lies ahead, and the amount of choices in these tools is what makes Souls-like special. On your first run, you'll probably figure out what the different stats mean and how to level up for a build. Curiosity is your best friend. Eventually, if you're inventive enough, you will learn how to make a build that will trivialize some of the bosses. The game has so many options that you play it the way you want to. You choose a class because you like it. You pick a weapon and use it because it looks cool, not because it has the best stats. Although that can also be a reason. You level up health before attack power because you want to stay alive in a fight, or attack power before health because you feel confident that you can survive. You choose a build because you want to fight the enemy up close, or because you want to keep your distance while managing your mana. This choice of how you approach the game is always in your hands. And if you think that the approach is not good enough, you can switch it up and try again with something different. The game does not have limited lives. It does not close off encounters because you chose a particular class, and it does not stop you from trying a fight in different ways. If a boss is doing lightning attacks, wear some armor that resists lightning, or get a shield that blocks all of it. Similarly, if a boss is weak to fire, maybe try using a fire resin, or a spell, or fire bombs. Experimentation and curiosity are almost always rewarded. You play the game how you want. If you want to use summons, go for it. If you want to play with the level 1 build, all the best. If you want to use a guide to help you out, here are some I recommend. If you want to go in blind, remember to be patient. If you want to face bosses alone, have at them. If you want to face them with friends, have fun. There are tens of ways of playing these games, and the game design makes every build viable. Since the game is tied so deeply to player choices and skills, the rewards are also player-centric. What I mean is, a lot of the times the reward for defeating a boss or clearing a section is not some huge amount of souls, or a legendary armor or weapon, but the satisfaction of overcoming a difficult challenge. The reward is you becoming better. The path the player walks may be one laid out by the devs, but how they walked it was defined by them. The story of losing to a boss 10 or 20 or sometimes even 100 times and then defeating them through sheer skill and mastery is the ultimate reward that these games provide the player. Sure, you get some souls, but that's not the hook of the game. It's the feeling of learning, growing, and getting better. When designing a game, designers aim to immerse the player in the world they created to the best of their ability. One of the tools to do so is by getting them into a flow state. It is when the boundaries of the outside world and the game dissolve and the player is left in a state of complete immersion. Ideas of time and stress go away. The player becomes the character. The way to induce it is by a careful tuning of the game's difficulty curve. See, if the game is too easy, the players will become bored. But if it's too difficult, the players will bounce off the game, stating that the challenge is too much or it is unfair. Most players bounce off Souls-likes for the same reason. The difficulty is too much for them. They keep dying to a section of the game, and that can be frustrating. But here's what I've learned from my experience. It is that dying is an essential part of the game. You can only feel the high of winning a tough fight if it was tough enough to begin with. Once the game clicks, you see the things in terms of lessons and not frustrations. The game almost feels like the match from Challengers. A back and forth between you dying and learning something and you applying it. I often wondered before I fell in love with Souls-likes, what is the click most people talk about when referring to these games? I've come to the conclusion that this acceptance of losing progress or souls, or your self-image as the perfect gamer, is what the click is. You stop being intimidated by the game and step up as the underdog because you stop being afraid and your curiosity about the world takes over you. Facing challenge after challenge, no matter how hard you lose to a boss. In fact, what originally scared you now piques your interest. What originally frustrated you now gives you a chance to surpass your skill. The flow state only happens with Souls-likes if and when they click, otherwise you end up playing an anxiety simulator. This acceptance gives way to an unforgettable experience and lessons that I've applied to almost every area of my life. I played Dark Souls when it came out on PC. I saved up my travel money by walking home from school a couple of days and buying a cool looking game from a bootleg movie shop. There were no legit video game stores where I live. Anyway, I booted up the game and I tried it for maybe half an hour. I got past the Asylum Demon, but then the cemetery was too much for me. Instead of finding a different way, I kept trying to overcome the skeletons. I bounced off the game. A couple of years later, Dark Souls 3 came out and I thought, I'm good at video games now, so I did the same thing and played it. I remember being very frustrated and scared around the Lothric Knights and somehow getting past Ward, but what got to me was the Curse Rotted Greatward. I could never get past it, so I bounced off that one as well. A couple of years later, Sekiro came out and I mistook it for Ghost of Tsushima and I bought it. I got to the ogre and kept dying over and over again till I eventually quit that game as well. I remember fighting all of those bosses I quit on and being scared of losing. Not just my soul or sen, but my self-image. I thought because I played video games, I should be good at all of them. I thought maybe these games aren't meant for me and I went to play something else. A couple of years later, the pandemic happened and I was stuck in my home playing Hollow Knight. I finished the 5th Pantheon and it was amazing to see how good it felt. And seeing how people compared that game to Souls-likes, I thought, why not? Why not give them a try again? You see, during these years I wanted to play those games so bad, but I just couldn't get myself to do so because I was afraid. Afraid of the bosses in the world. Afraid of what if I lose and can't beat a boss or clear a section. And yet I was so intrigued by the Souls games. The lore and the design of them. I had seen streamers like Faraz Khan do no head of the game and I was amazed at how that was even possible. And so I thought I have to at least finish Dark Souls. So I went on YouTube and I looked up a guide and I found Fighting Cowboy. And am I glad I did. He explained the game very well. Laid out the mechanics and the way the game works and how the combat works. I played the game with him playing in the background. I finished the game because of him and I can't thank him enough for it. I booted up Dark Souls 3 next because I had an old grudge to settle against it. I went in blind and immediately saw how the pacing of the game was faster and yet everything else was the same. I saw the world of the game with fresh eyes and walked through it knowing I could do it because I had done it once before and it clicked. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was having fun with a claymore and a shield. Seeing all the cool monsters and the giant castles, reading obscure lore which made little sense to me until I watched a Vati video. It was by facing all that adversity and growing because of it that I was finally starting to enjoy Souls-likes. As I've said before, design is a way for people to communicate without words. And so game design is a form of communication between the devs and the players. This makes games a relationship. And Souls-likes are honest relationships. Relationships in which, if you listen closely, you hear the devs laughing every time you fall for a trap. You hear them smirking every time you're about to walk into an ambush. You hear them teaching you every time you fight a tough fight. You hear them cheer you but give you no quarter as you're about to win. You see the designers be honest with these games because they tell you straight up when you're not good enough to go further. And that brutal, honest relationship with the player is what lies at the heart of Souls-likes. Hey, you did it. You reached the end. Thanks a lot for watching all of the video, I really appreciate it. Here's an imaginary cookie that's the tastiest imaginary cookie of all time. If you liked the video, remember to drop a like, and if you want to watch more of me talk about games and game design, subscribe and hit the bell icon. I can't believe I have 100 subs now. No words, literally. But I'm gonna make a video that needs to be made about that. So again, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you.
Pretty be careful.